He wasn't the most important person there. The President of the United States is usually the most important person in the room, or the most important person in the stadium, or the most important person wherever the president is. Not today. Joe Biden knew that the 200 D-Day veterans who surrounded him today on the coast of France were the most important people there. They were the most important people there 80 years ago, and they were the most important people there today.
The men who fought here became heroes, not because they were the strongest or toughest or most fiercest, although they were, but because they were given an audacious mission, knowing, every one of them knew, the probability of dying was real. But they did it anyway. They knew, beyond any doubt, there are things that are worth fighting and dying for.
The world had never seen anything like the D-Day invasion of the northern coast of France along the English Channel on June 6, 1944, and the world has never seen anything like it since.
Winston Churchill called what happened here, quote, the greatest, most complicated operation ever.
Winston Churchill wanted to be there. Prime Minister Churchill, who was a combat veteran in his younger days, told the commander of the D-Day invasion and future President of the United States, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, that he wanted to board a Navy ship to get a close-up view of the Allied troops hitting the beach in Normandy. General Eisenhower told Churchill that they could not take that risk. Churchill told an exasperated General Eisenhower that he would board a British Navy ship and there was nothing the American general could do to stop him. And that was true. Eisenhower couldn't stop Churchill from boarding a British Navy ship. But the King of England could. When King George heard that Churchill was going to join the D-Day invasion forces on a British Navy ship, the King said he wanted to be on that ship too. And then Prime Minister Churchill, the most stubborn and the most courageous British Prime Minister in history, backed down, realizing that he couldn't risk the King's life on that warship that day. And so Winston Churchill and the King of England and the President of the United States had to stay at their posts and wait. Wait for the most important news they would ever hear in their lives. Before General Eisenhower gave the order to go, he was warned by his top expert on the airborne landing of paratroopers that it was going to be a disaster, that almost all of the paratroopers who would be the very first Americans to set foot in France that day would be shot dead by German fire as they were floating to Earth, hanging from their parachutes. They would almost all land on French soil dead. That was the prediction. The paratroopers were going to land behind enemy lines so that if the soldiers who hit the beach could make it up the hill past the first line of German defense, they would have the support of those brave paratroopers already on the ground in France, having landed in the middle of the night. General Eisenhower was given a vision of all of those paratroopers lying dead in French fields. And he knew that the invasion plan couldn't work without the paratroopers landing first. He also knew that the slightest change in the weather could completely defeat the invasion. And General Eisenhower knew that it was possible that virtually all of the Allied troops who made it to the beach would be immediately cut down by German fire and never make it across those beaches. Every single aspect of the most complex logistical undertaking in human history could have gone wrong, and could have gone wrong all at the same time. And instead of the history that was commemorated there today, that can seem so inevitable in retrospect, we could have had a disastrous defeat and full retreat back across the English Channel to England. And the Allies, after such a full defeat and retreat, could not possibly have attempted another invasion for at least a year. It had taken 2 years to plan the D-Day invasion. It had taken more than a year to build many of the innovative kinds of equipment that got those soldiers to shore that day. A new kind of massive floating dock had to be invented and then built and then dragged across the English Channel, something that had never been used before and no one was sure would work. There were countless ways for the D-Day invasion to fail, and Dwight Eisenhower knew every single one of them, and he still said go. And when he said go, he hand-wrote the statement that he would issue in defeat, the statement he never had to issue. In his own handwriting, General Eisenhower wrote, "Our landings in the Cherbourg-Havre area have failed to gain a satisfactory foothold, and I have withdrawn the troops. My decision to attack at this time and place was based on the best information available. The troops, the air, and the Navy did all that bravery and devotion to duty could do. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone." Of course, General Eisenhower was ready to take the blame alone, because that's what honor demanded. 8 years later, General Eisenhower was elected President of the United States. After General Eisenhower's faithful service to Democratic presidents, he became the first Republican president in 20 years. And in a tragic collapse of honor in Dwight Eisenhower's political party, it is now impossible to imagine the last Republican president taking the blame alone for anything. In fact, Donald Trump's last White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly, who was a Marine Corps general, says that Donald Trump, quote, rants that our most precious heroes who gave their lives in America's defense are losers and wouldn't visit their graves in France. Ernest Hemingway was with the troops on D-Day as they approached the beach. In a magazine article titled Voyage to Victory, Hemingway wrote, "The wind was blowing hard out of the northwest. As we moved in in the gray early light, the 36-foot coffin-shaped steel boats took solid green sheets of water that fell on the helmeted heads of the troops, packed shoulder to shoulder in the stiff, awkward, uncomfortable, lonely companionship of men going to a battle. As far as you could see, there were landing craft moving in over the gray sea." Hemingway watched the battleship Texas shelling the shore. She was just off on our right now and firing over us as we moved in toward the French coast. Those of our troops who were not wax gray with seasickness, fighting it off, trying to hold on to themselves before they had to grab for the steel side of the boat, were watching the Texas with looks of surprise and happiness. Under the steel helmets, they looked like pikemen of the Middle Ages to whose aid in battle had suddenly come some strange and unbelievable monster. Other ships were firing over us all day, and you were never away from the sudden slapping thud of naval gunfire. But the big guns of the Texas and Arkansas that sounded as though they were throwing whole railway trains across the sky were far away as we moved on in. They were no part of our world as we moved steadily over the gray, white-capped sea toward where, ahead of us, death was being issued in small, intimate, accurately administered packages. They were like the thunder of a storm that is passing in another county, whose rain will never reach you, but they were knocking out the shore batteries so that later the destroyers could move in almost to the shore. On the beach on the left, where there was no sheltering overhang of shingled bank, the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth waves lay where they had fallen, looking like so many heavily laden bundles on the flat, pebbly beach.
A notable band of brothers are here with us today. Kenneth Blaine Smith is here. On that day, under heavy artillery fire, he operated a rangefinder and radar on the first American ship to arrive at Normandy's coast, providing direct gunfire support for the Rangers scaling the cliffs of Pointe du Hoc on their daring mission to take out the German batteries. Bob Gibson is here. He landed on Utah Beach about 10 hours after the invasion began. Bullets flying everywhere, tracers lighting up the sky. Bob drove an M4 tractor with anti-aircraft gun mounted on top, providing critical protection for the infantry against the German Air Force. On that day, and for many days after, he continued. Ben Miller is here, a medic with the 82nd Airborne. At 3 a.m. on June 6th, he and 13 other medics flew over the channel in a rickety glider. Its wings were ripped off by giant poles that the Germans buried halfway in the ground to stop them from landing. They crashed, but they survived. And they did their duty, dragging injured soldiers to safety, treating wounds, saving lives while the battle raged. Every soldier who stormed the beach, who dropped by parachute or landed by glider, every sailor who manned the thousands of ships and landing craft, every aviator who destroyed German-controlled airfields, bridges, and railroads, all were backed by other brave Americans, including hundreds of thousands of people of color and women who courageously served despite unjust limitations on what they could do for their nation. Lewis Brown is here, part of the Red Ball Express, a truck convoy made up of mostly African-American drivers. They landed in Normandy in the wake of D-Day. They rushed supplies to the rapidly advancing front lines. Woody Woodhouse is here, members of the legendary Tuskegee Airmen, who flew over 15,000 sorties during the war. Marjorie Stone is here. She enlisted in the women's branch of the Naval Reserve, became an aircraft mechanic, spent the war keeping American planes and pilots in the air. Theirs has always been the story of America. Just walk the rows of this cemetery as I have. Nearly 10,000 heroes buried side by side, officers and enlisted, immigrants and native-born, different races, different faiths, but all Americans. All served with honor when America and the world needed them most.
After the war, peace in Europe was built and maintained with the United Nations and with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, whose mission is still maintaining peace in Europe.
The United States and NATO and a coalition of more than 50 countries standing strong with Ukraine. We will not walk away. Because if we do, Ukraine will be subjugated, and it will not end there. Ukraine's neighbors will be threatened. All of Europe will be threatened. And make no mistake, the autocrats of the world are watching closely to see what happens in Ukraine, to see if we let this illegal aggression go unchecked. We cannot let that happen. To surrender to bullies, to bow down to dictators is simply unthinkable. Were we to do that, it means we'd be forgetting what happened here in these hallowed beaches. Make no mistake, we will not bow down. We will not forget.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky was there today to honor those who fought for freedom 80 years ago.
Oh, you're the savior of the people. Here's my eyes. Not a picture. No, you are our hero.
I pray for you.
Your opponent, I just want to read something else that your opponent said. In denying the Holocaust, he said it is foolishness, the idea that Hitler, quote, he does not believe that Hitler was marching the Jews off to concentration camps. He says that is a bunch of hogwash. How can North Carolina voters be seriously considering a candidate like that?
We hope that they don't. North Carolina is a very politically competitive state. We're pretty much a 50-50 state, which means that every candidate has a legitimate shot. And what our job in this campaign is about is making sure voters understand the stakes of this election and the clarity of the choice between competing visions. You know, mine is forward-looking and inclusive. It's about fighting for people and tapping the potential of every person to build a safer and stronger state. And you've heard the man. His vision is division and hate. And he says awful, hateful things about people. And North Carolina has got to do better, and we can do better. And in this election, if we work hard, we will do better.
Well, we heard just now in your campaign ad what he says about women and abortion, but he also said, I absolutely want to go back to the America where women couldn't vote. Do the women of North Carolina know that? Do they know he said that?
I don't think people really know just the awful beliefs that Mark Robinson has. He got elected in 2020. It was in a lieutenant governor race. There, frankly, wasn't a lot of media attention dedicated to it. There weren't TV commercials. So voters went in thinking he was just a generic Republican running against a generic Democrat. And 2020, that person was typically going to win as a Republican. Now we want to make sure voters know exactly who he is, what he's about, how he wants to turn back the clock in North Carolina and then break that clock. And I think that if voters do know that, if we build a winning campaign, and you know we need to get all the grassroots support we can, and folks can go to joshstein.org if they want to learn more. If we do our jobs, which is to educate voters, I have faith in the people of North Carolina to make the right choice.
Well, it looks like 17% of them need more information. I want to put this poll up. It shows you, Josh Stein, at 37%. It shows your Republican opponent at 37%. But it shows what is now, in today's politics, a large undecided of 17%. And I suspect that those 17% do not know that Mark Robinson said, I absolutely want to go back to the America where women could not vote.
And that's why we went on TV this week, Lawrence. We want voters to have information about exactly who he is. We also went up with a commercial about my record as Attorney General, fighting for the people, eliminating the largest backlog of untested rape kits in the country, tackling the opioid crisis, and doing this work on a bipartisan basis. People want people who will solve problems in a non-ideological way, in a bipartisan fashion whenever possible. They do not want these bomb throwers when it comes to electing the governor of their state.
This is the kind of candidate who might have some real fundraising strength, especially with Donald Trump's support.
He does. I mean, he is raising money at a clip that no Republican candidate for governor ever has in North Carolina. It's troubling, but he's raising money all across the country. That's what he does. He goes and travels to these right-wing media shows and gets a lot of attention, a lot of contributions. But I believe in our grassroots team, too. We have tens of thousands of contributors, and we need to keep building that campaign so that we can win come November.
North Carolina Attorney General Josh Stein, now candidate for governor. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you.